Welcome back, everybody. Here we are again in the lovely bedroom to now do our MCU rankings of Phase 2. I am Aaron Luce, all with my host,
Jake Carter.
Heck yeah, let's do this, my guy. So, before we get into it, I want to just say Phase 2, really fun on a second watch.
Yeah, they really upped, I think, kind of the scale from the previous phase. They kind of knew what they were doing. They were starting to figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. So let's run through the 6 movies we're going to be ranking today in Phase 2. We have Iron Man 3 coming out in May of 2013, followed by Thor The Dark World coming out in November of 2013. Then Captain America, The Winter Soldier, April of 2014. Guardians of the Galaxy, August 2014. Age of Ultron, the Avengers Age of Ultron, May of 2015. And then rounding out Phase 2, we got Ant-Man coming out in June of 2015. So I think this is the first time, where I feel like Phase 1, we kind of already going into a discussion. We already kind of knew, where each movie was going to be. I feel like Phase 2 is kind of also similar to that, where it's like, okay, we know our top 3 in it. But then the bottom 3, kind of played around. So I will admit, I had to definitely do another rewatch of Thor The Dark World to make sure if it was that bad or if it was better. And spoiler,
it's a stinker. But it's a pretty stinker.
It's a pretty stinker. Yeah. Which leads us right into our number 6 spot for the MCU Phase 2. At number 6, we got Thor The Dark World. Jake, I'll let you kick it off. What do you think of Thor The Dark World being at number 6?
So it definitely belongs at the bottom of the barrel. Mainly for the plot, if anything. It's just kind of a little bit convoluted with sort of this convergence idea, very sciencey things, which would be cool, but the way that it was executed was a little weird. I mean, if anything, the part when Jane gets sucked into the weird portal world where the ether is, and then that whole scene where the ether is taking over her, very symbiote looking kind of thing. It just looks like something out of an X-Men movie, just very bad, and she's just floating there like the Dark Phoenix. Just but that being said, I actually did forget how pretty this movie was. Visually, it looked really good and stunning. I know in the last video I was complaining about the weird Dutch angles, the camera angles they had, which sideways. They got rid of that for this, but overall I think it looked really well put together.
Yeah, you kind of nailed it. I remember within the first 10 minutes of the movie, we get the cool gravitational anomaly in London. They're playing around with that, and I was okay, this isn't as bad as people were I remember. And then we see her following on the little scanner and gets sucked in it's some type of Exorcist movie, and you're just
what's happening?
Okay, and then then it's symbiotes that attack her and go into her, and then that whole scene where she's just it's just it was just weird. I didn't like it. Also too, they're really heavy-handed with the Jane and Thor romance in this. My God, so much so where I was it's a teenage drunken love kind of situation.
Yeah, it got very YA novel-y in some parts where you're okay, I get it. I mean, he's a god of thunder, of course. Who isn't going to be have the hots for him? And she's Natalie Portman, she's Padme for crying out loud.
Oh, I mean, absolutely.
Hell yeah, but still, it was definitely a little heavy-handed. In addition to everything else that was going on, you're just okay, slow down maybe. But which I guess going back to the romance, later on in Love and Thunder, when we get to Phase 4, we can talk about kind of how that did it. But
yeah. We won't even get to that. But another thing too is I'm a big sucker. I love fantasy. I love Lord of the Rings. I love the Game of Thrones series. I love fantasy novels and whatnot. And so I really like how they do keep merging in each story iteration. We keep getting more explanation of kind of the science and kind of more sci-fi elements, with the more fantasy mythology of Norse mythology. But we didn't need no dark elves being in spaceships.
Yeah, that was kind of...
It was just kind of weird and jarring a little bit.
Well, and Malekith, who's the main villain in this movie, probably the least memorable villain out of all the MCU. Just total one-note kind of character. Had no... Besides just being the bad guy and wanting, the MacGuffin, which is the ether of this movie, he had no depth to him, which was unfortunate. But I will say one thing that this movie also does really well is I think they were starting to nail Thor's look.
Yeah.
He definitely looked more natural. I know also...
Really liked his armor in this one.
Yeah. And just also his hair. I was also complaining in the other video of how it was very bleached and stuff. they were still bleaching it a little bit, but at least they kind of let his like beard go naturally, and they grew out his hair, and he looked very, Norseman.
Yeah.
Here for it.
Yeah. I mean, we could probably make a whole video on just kind of our thoughts of Thor The Dark World, because it is such a weird, like, hit but mostly miss kind of movie.
Yeah, and they do some really interesting things with, like, family. I thought, like, Frigga in this movie, I mean, this is also the movie she dies, so, like, there are a lot of nice, sweet scenes with this, and we'll talk about that again once we get to Endgame, but yeah, overall, I think it was just kind of a meh for a sequel.
All right, leading us into, at our number 5 spot, we have Ant-Man. Good old Kansas City boy Paul Rudd.
Ants in my pants. Ants in my pants.
Which that's a callback to the original promo, if you guys don't remember that. Man, Michael Douglas and Paul Rudd just ants.
So great.
And okay, so I want to say, like, it's obviously number 5 out of 6 on our spot in the MCU movie. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I just think it doesn't hold up compared to the other 4 that we have above it. Because it is fun. Like, it is more so like a lighthearted comedy kind of amongst the pantheon of the MCU movies. I really like the use of, they really just hammed it up with the use of, like, making, like, things that were so used, like the Thomas the Train scene, like, giving it a different perspective of, like, they get hit by it. And I love, like, the pan outs where it shows it in, like, our size scene and just fall off the tracks. Like, it's fun, but, like, I don't know. Like, yeah.
Yeah. It's also kind of just a very straightforward plot. Like, nothing really, they didn't do anything special besides, like, the effects with, like, Ant-Man and, like you're saying, all the different scale. Also, this movie was kind of one that was plagued with a lot of behind the scenes drama. Edgar Wright was attached to direct it for a long time, and then they had their creative differences, and then Peyton Reed came aboard, which he's been doing a good job since and what he's given with. But for me, it was also just kind of like, okay, very just, we're going through the motions, nothing, doing anything revolutionary. It's fine. I mean, Paul Rudd got jacked for this role, which is, good for him. But yeah, I enjoyed it, but I think it's just kind of like, I think that these other movies are more interesting.
Yeah, and I think, like, with Ant-Man too, like, I like Ant-Man the character, and I think he does a better, like, I like him better in, like, Civil War and Infinity War, and, like, well, I guess not Infinity War, but, like, in Endgame and stuff. Like, I like his portrayal in those movies better, and I think it's because, I don't know, I think it just plays up that he's just a common thief that got booked a couple times for, trespassing and thievery and whatnot, and he gets anointed with, like, this, like, super suit. So I don't know, it's kind of a cool tale as well. So
I do like the flashback scene that we get with Michael Douglas and Janet, like, when they're on the missile. Like, Michael Douglas is talking about the time that Janet, like, because in this movie she's missing, she's in the quantum realm that we find out.
Wait, is that Ant-Man and the Wasp though?
Well, in this movie we get a flashback to them, like, on a missile, like, and then it's like she's gone or whatever. And so I'm like, oh, that's cool that, like, I mean, it showed Michael Douglas and them in action, like, back in, like, what, the 60s, 70s or something. And I'm like, ooh, give us, like, a retro Avengers kind of movie, Yeah. Like, and then also we got a flashback to, like, S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time. And so it's like, you had young, de-aged Michael Douglas along with, like, Peggy Carter and Howard Stark. And I'm like, I would actually like to see that. That would be pretty cool. I'm also I like period pieces, as we've mentioned. So, I think having a cool timepiece of Avengers in a different era would be kind of neat.
Alrighty, so moving on to our number 4 spot, we have Iron Man 3. So,
actually, I need to ask you an interesting question about this. Is this a Christmas movie?
Oh, absolutely, man. Like, controversial take here. If it takes place, like, if in the movie, if it takes place around Christmas time, if there is snow on the ground and it's a Christmas movie. Die Hard, I know people, like, no, it's a Christmas movie. Like, I don't care. This movie came out in what? May. It came out in May. I don't care. It takes place around Christmas. It's a Christmas movie. Like, come on. Like, capitalize on that. Too,
they're starting the hype for Christmas already in May.
But I think for me, this movie, I know it's like the first $1 billion film of the MCU, but also kind of forgettable. Like, going back every time I watch it, I go, oh yeah, that's what this one's about. Oh yeah. And I think because of that, this one's probably been one of the best, like, aged ones. Like, I think after each kind of consecutive watch that I've seen it, the more I appreciate it, the more I'm like, okay, yeah, this was actually a good film. And, like, I think just it got kind of folded up with all the other releases that we don't really remember as good as it actually is.
Yeah. Well, for it being an Iron Man movie, we don't get a lot of Iron Man in it. We get a lot of Iron Man suits later, but like, a lot of the movie is spent with Tony outside of the suit, which is, an interesting kind of character piece of who he is as a person, and, like, really exploring his PTSD from the whole Avengers movie, which I think is interesting. And this was kind of the first phase that they start exploring like what happened after certain events that they've already set up. And so I thought that was kind of neat. But yeah, overall, I mean, I feel like Adrian Killich or whatever his name is, villain, he's kind of like also like he's got beef with Tony, but it's just like, okay, he like has the extremist virus that he's creating, and then they give it to Pepper too, and I'm like, oh shit, is she a superhero now? Like, yeah. But then they cure her, I guess. And I mean, it was really cool though, seeing all the suits in the end like come together, and how like Tony's paranoia is what led to him like creating all these suits. And, that for me is probably the standout. And then, I mean, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the whole Mandarin twist, because like, had Ben Kingsley in there, who's like set up as like the Mandarin, and like he's got that presence, 'cause he's a renowned actor. And then they do the whole subverting it, where it's like, oh, he's just an actor being paid, which I thought was kind of cool at the time.
Yeah, I actually liked it.
I know a lot of people were like pissed off about it and just like, whoa, we want the real Mandarin. Well, just wait a few more years and you'll get it. But yeah, I thought it was fun.
Yeah, this is also the most like smallest like kind of self-contained stories, where I feel like we don't get that in phase one. We don't really get that sense of like this is all connected, obviously, because of that kind of happens with the crescendo of Avengers. But then kind of moving through phase 2, 3, and onward, everything does feel like it has that connective tissue to the other movies and whatnot. And this is, I think, one of the only ones post phase 1 that does feel kind of just about Tony, just self-contained, which I actually kind of like, especially because it focuses on like Tony kind of dealing with like that trauma and like kind of like the panic attacks and stuff that result from that potential self-sacrifice they try to do with the missile in New York. And so it's like, I don't know, like I think where we'll kind of talk about this when we get to phase 4 a little bit, where phase 1 ended with like this kind of team up. I thought it was interesting that they began phase 2 with like this kind of self-contained story. And then fast forward to phase 3, where we end with this big crescendo. I feel like phase 4 kind of faltered a little bit because then it kept kind of connecting. And I think they should have pulled a page out of this book and been like, let's self-contain a little bit.
Because I think that's where the quote-unquote superhero fatigue comes from, is all these movies start feeling the same because it's these world-ending disasters that are happening. And it's like, not everything needs to be, world cataclysmic. We can have these kind of smaller stories that are more looking at like the hero's personal struggles, which I think are interesting. And yeah, so we'll get into that once we get to phase 4.
Yeah, phase 4 is going to be a fun video because we got a lot of thoughts, a lot of positive thoughts, a lot of critiquing thoughts on phase 4. Like, so stick around for that. So yeah, let's move on to the number 3 spot. We have the Avengers Age of Ultron, or Avengers 2, if you will. Another movie that I thought also like got more backlash than it should have, but has improved with every watch that I've seen it. Like, I appreciate it more like after each watch since 2014, 2015, whenever that came out.
Yeah, 2015. And yeah, I also remember that Age of Ultron, when it came out, a lot of people were like, wait, what? And like had negative kind of thoughts. Don't really remember exactly why. It is interesting looking at the first Avengers and Age of Ultron, both directed by Joss Whedon, but like visually they just look totally different. And I actually kind of like the look they went with in Age of Ultron, kind of the darker. Again, they kind of figured out the looks for each of the heroes. Cap's suit in this is way better than it was in Avengers.
Which makes sense because it's post.
That's true.
Winter Soldier, so.
Which really introduced it. But and then like even Thor looking also great. Then we had some new characters introduced, like Wanda, her brother, and then Vision, of course. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I actually really liked it. I think Ultron is a really menacing character. Even more impactful that, it was Tony and Bruce that created him. And again, it's just like, I think it sets up a lot of nice things and since then, they've done a lot of cool things in like different shows and movies to really make this movie even better.
I think like the fact that we got kind of like this ensemble movie with the like Age of Ultron, and it's not like this galactic, big world threat. Like, yes, like Ultron's goal was to annihilate humans and like that was going to be world changing, but like it does take place just in like Sokovia. And I kind of like that we get kind of more of that, like, all right, like earthly issues, right? We're not like focusing on like a big baddie out there.
I love that we get the Avengers like working as a team to like clear out the rest of these Hydra bases that are uncovered in Winter Soldier, of like, oh, Hydra's actually been the one behind the scenes of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all this stuff. And so to see like the Avengers going around, like taking all them out as a team is so freaking cool. And in the first Avengers, everybody loves that shot where they're all in a circle in the assembled moment. And then in this, we get that kind of shot where they're all in the woods or whatever. And it's like, and they're all, lunging towards action. Pretty fucking rad.
Honestly, too, like this is gonna be a bold statement to say, but I think this has one of the best like end credit like visuals because like the statue. You know how like it zooms on each part of the statue and it shows like the battle of like Sokovia, and then when it pans out, you see like this cool like statue that if in real life would probably be like $400-$600. I'm kind of like, I don't want that. I don't want that.
That'd be pretty neat.
But that's also a great sequence when they're all fighting right there where they have to defend the I don't know power thingy mabob. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And then also the scene where they're having the party at the Avengers Tower.
Oh,
That's one of my personal favorite like non-hero scenes, you know, where they're all just
Brody
like,
going around trying to keep telling the same story over and over again.
And then we get like the one thing that was kind of weird was like the Natasha Bruce kind of romance that they were like, oh, this is a thing that's just happening, which you know, I do kind of like her whole like, hey, sun's getting low, big guy or whatever, but I'm like, do we need it? No, maybe not. I don't know.
I actually really liked it. I think where it kind of didn't come through or like kind of hold on, let me roll it back. Universal has the distributing rights to Hulk movies, right? Hulk is still owned by Disney and Marvel and can be in their movies, but if they make an individual Hulk movie, it has to be distributed by Universal. So if that happens, that's instantly going to go on, you know, Peacock, their streaming service. Hence why we haven't had a Hulk movie. Quick little background there. I think one of the MCU's biggest like pitfalls is that we never got like a Mark Ruffalo Hulk movie, either like end of phase 2 or even in phase 3. Because just imagine you could have like kind of explored the Natasha kind of Bruce romance and then explain how the hell he ends up on Sakaar, you know, later in Ragnarok.
Yeah. Or like what's going on with Betty, you know?
Yeah. What's going on with Betty, right? Because so like that was kind of something I was thinking about the past couple of weeks because I know like there's been talks about Disney trying to acquire like the Hulk distributing rights and whatnot through like a Hulu deal and blah 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 blah. But I was like, like we could have really used like a Mark Ruffalo like standalone Hulk movie.
Yeah, I think the reason it just didn't work for me is like it just literally goes nowhere after this movie.
You know, like that's why. Yeah,
and I don't know if that was just them being like, ooh yeah, like let's just not try to, you know, because we are obviously building towards Infinity War and Endgame, so we don't have time to do that. But it also just kind of like, eh.
I think this is also kind of. I think part of the reason why they introduced that is like show the first steps of trying to like pacify or control the Hulk. Because let's be real, as cool as it is to see Hulk like get out there and just tear shit up, you know, and just like Hulk smash. For him to be a part of like a ensemble or like an Avengers team that is a little more calculated because it is, you know, live action film. I think it's just hard to translate. So it's like, all right, how can we control the Hulk? Let's introduce like the lullaby thing, and then, you know, kind of keep moving on until we have like, you know, smart Hulk. But I don't know. I agree. Like it is kind of one of those. I wish if they're gonna do it, you know, flesh it out a little more, but it does kind of fall flat. So Jake, you want to introduce our number 2 spot?
Yeah, we have the first real like black sheep of the MCU, Guardians of the Galaxy. So this was a movie I remember when they announced it, nobody knew who these characters were except for the very hardcore comic fans. Like I was one of them who I just didn't know who they were. I instantly looked it up. And I think this was probably the biggest risk that Marvel was doing in terms of like a movie, like a new kind of franchise that they were trying to do. And so a lot of people were like, oh, this is going to flop. This isn't going to work. And then you had, of course, James Gunn attached to it, which he hadn't really done a whole lot up to that. Like he had done a couple smaller movies. And then you had, you know, Chris Pratt, who like the chubby guy from Parks and Rec. And like, of course, Zoe Saldana, who's an established actress at the time. And you know, this whole other kind of random...
Oh, Dave Bautista, you got
the wrestler in there.
Bradley Cooper's playing an animated raccoon.
Yeah, we don't even get to see what Bradley Cooper looked like. Like, yeah, so it was just like, okay, this is going to be an interesting take. And then it came out and just like blew all expectations out of the water, you know. You had the banger soundtrack that James Gunn had compiled. Like, the cast got, like, incredibly good. Like, Chris Pratt, like, jacked up for this role, too. Just a great heartfelt story of, like, this team coming together. And I think taking place in like space and just away from all the stuff that was happening on Earth was also a smart call to kind of really differentiate it and create its own visual language. So I really love this movie.
Yeah, I feel like this movie, when Jake and I were kind of playing out the show here, I was like, this movie is like the perfect like diamond in the rough. Like they struck gold with Guardians of the Galaxy because it was an IP that most, I would say, moviegoers were not familiar with. It was kind of like everything else had kind of started to mold itself, to connect itself, like it's just so on Earth. And then we started getting introduced like Infinity Stones and whatnot. But then, except Thor, Asgard, whatever, but it's on Earth, right? But then we get Guardians of the Galaxy, which is like out there in space. We don't know who the hell they are. And so the fact that we get this movie that is like, you know, an unknown IP, plus like takes place out in space, which let's be real, space stuff has been between Star Wars, Star Trek, Sci-Fi Channel, all those like movies and whatnot. Like, it's been done over again a lot. And for it to hit as hard as it is, and I think it's because they nailed it in the sense of making it relatable, in the sense of it is comedic, but it has all those emotional, heartfelt beats because it is like this chosen family of like kind of, a bunch of people that you wouldn't expect to team up and do something like productive. They fight a lot in this movie, which is hilarious.
Like they somehow made us care about a tree who literally says 3 different words.
Yeah.
Like Vin Diesel, nonetheless. Like, oh man, they just. They
must have really like embodied the family vibe from the Fast and Furious franchise through Groot.
I am Groot.
Yeah. So I would say, that Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2 are easily in my like top 10, if not top 5 favorite MCU movies. I think it's because of it still feels like an MCU movie, but totally changes up the build, changes up the story, kind of like the characters, how they interact is a little different than what we saw like earlier in the MCU. So yeah, it's one of my favorites.
And I think to everything we've said, like this movie did a really good job expanding the MCU, not just, like keeping it to the Avengers and Earth and the surrounding kind of areas, literally like expanding it out to space and showing that like this is a galaxy full of different characters and people, which I think did a really good job of like, for setting things up for when Captain Marvel was introduced and like all these other characters who we've seen. I think it really helped with that.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to our number 1 favorite movie in Phase 2. That is Captain America, The Winter Soldier. And I'll tell you what, this one, you want to talk about where Guardians of the Galaxy was kind of a black sheep, kind of changed it up, threw us out into space. This one was like foundational rocking. And I think it came at the perfect time for the MCU. And I think this is why we didn't really get that superhero fatigue talk until a little later, because you're telling me that S.H.I.E.L.D., who we've been building up for the past, phase and a half, is actually like a terrorist organization that's the remnants from World War II? Like, what?
Yeah, this movie is definitely the Dark Knight of the MCU. It is, it just like ups the stakes, tenfold. It makes it really personal for the character. It kind of changes the character's mindset. Like Captain America starts off being this very, hopeful, self-righteous, kind of ambitious guy, right? And then in the present day, he kind of sees how the world has changed and he feels very out of place. I love his like list of, things to watch and listen to and do. But yeah, he's just like, oh my God, realizes that this organization that he's trusted, like, is now the enemy that he was fighting back in World War II. It's just so interesting. So many cool things. And then Black Widow in this movie I thought was also great.
Oh, yeah.
Like a nice foil to him.
And then we get introduced to Sam as well.
Yeah, Sam Wilson.
Falcon stuff. And I think what I really like about this is it completely breaks the mold of like the MCU. And like I now I know why the Russo brothers got, chosen to do the Infinity War and Endgame, because they nailed this movie in the sense of that, like, you have our protagonist, our very golden boy, Captain America, and now he is like the bad guy. And you have S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra, like chasing him. And it's pretty much just him on the run, trying to figure out how to take down this organization, plus how to save his best friend that he just found out is alive and has been like a Russian, like, sleeper cell agent for the past 80, 90 years or whatever. Like, and, I love Bucky.
I was gonna say, I hadn't even got to Bucky yet, but oh my God, Bucky in this movie, just Winter Soldier, so menacing, so terrifying. And that realization when Steve realized, oh my God, that's Bucky. Like, that their fight on the highway is like one of my favorite MCU fight scenes.
Oh yeah,
so well done.
Yeah, it's kind of sad to me as we watch these movies to like rank them in the MCU, and we watch like a Captain America, Winter Soldier, we watch like a Guardians, and just to kind of think of the movies that we've gotten in Phase 4. Jumping ahead a little bit, not to not too much spoilers on our Phase 4 thoughts, but it's just like like I'm waiting for like that kind of like out of the mold kind of, let's like kind of, be a little adventurous kind of like MCU movie that we haven't really gotten since pretty much Phase 2. Because Phase 3, I feel like for the most part they were kind of similar, but it was because it's building up to like Endgame and Infinity War, and you kind of like, okay, kind of suspend your belief a little bit. But
yeah, and I thought this like also like Nick Fury in this movie was really, his character was really good, and like his whole like fake out death thing, which
I totally forgot.
A lot of people were like, maybe was this when he like switched to becoming a Skrull? Was like after his whole, obviously he survived.
I guess
but
we'll
then
find
he kind of
out.
went off, but I guess we'll find out soon with Secret Invasion.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like I love, one of my favorite scenes in this movie is when Cap and Natasha go back to the camp where Cap was trained at and stuff in New Jersey, and they find the bunker with Arnim Zola in the computer, and he's like revealing all these like things of how Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and man, that reveal was so great. And Oh my god, I'm blanking on what his name is, the big bad at the end. Robert Redford.
Yep.
His character just so menacing, and like I love how they bring him back for in-game, and but yeah, it's just so cool. And you know, we also get some nice little Easter eggs to like Stephen Strange.
Oh, the elevator scene.
Oh my god, the elevator scene. Like,
does anybody want to get off?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, this is so fucking cool, man. Just like beats the shit out of all of them. I love it.
So let's do a quick little rundown of our ranking real quick before we do final thoughts on the phase in general. But so the Fangents ranking for phase 2 of the MCU. At number 6, we have Thor The Dark World. Number 5, Ant-Man. Number 4, Iron Man 3. Number 3, The Avengers Age of Ultron. Number 2, Guardians of the Galaxy. And number 1, Captain America The Winter Soldier. Jake, I know we kind of molded them down a little bit, but like give us like your final analysis, your final thoughts on the phase 2 and like as a whole.
Yeah, I think phase 2 did what it needed to do to keep the MCU kind of going and expanding. Like we said, I think with movies like Guardians, it really helped to kind of open up the whole world and galaxy more. And then obviously with like these sequels like Iron Man 3, even Thor The Dark World to a little extent, but then especially Captain America Winter Soldier, really like kind of diving deeper into the characters' sort of psyche and like who they are. So I think it did what it needed to do to really keep exploring that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of echoing what you just said, for this being, you know, for 4 out of the 6 movies in phase 2 being some sort of a sequel, they did a great job of, you know, keep pushing the envelope and kind of like changing up the kind of visual language and the feel of the MCU that is what we now know today. I think this was the best kind of upgrade from phase 1 and also the best way they could have teed up phase 3. And the book fell.
I think it agrees. I think that's a sign from the universe.
But yeah, no, I think phase 2 is comparing to phase 1, not that we need to do that, but I think comparing to phase 1, I would say phase 2 is better because I think they finally actually got their, you know, kind of their feet steady. They kind of knew what the heck they were doing, and they kind of tweaked some visual things that maybe were a little too campy in phase 1. So I'm not saying that phase 1 is worse, but yeah, I think phase 2, like they really nailed it.
Agreed.
But, yeah. Alrighty, guys. Well, that has been our MCU phase 2 ranking. You know, we're gonna we will be doing phase 3. Look out for that video, probably coming in the next week or so. But in the meantime, get in the comments. Let us know your thoughts. What are your rankings? Which one was your favorite? Do you agree with us? Do you think we were absolute garbage in our rankings?
Do you really like Thor The Dark World? Please convince me why.
Yeah. But until next time, guys, I've been Aaron.
I've been Jake.
We'll see you next time.